Hey there, this is Introduction to Graphic Design, and we're talking about typography, lettering, and also design briefs in this session. And my name is Alvalin Lundgren. So if you're a graphic designer, you're going to be working with type a lot. And typography deals with the written language. And the thing about the written language is that it's also very visual. And the purpose of written language is for communication, and we communicate processes, ideas, emotions, we communicate stories, we communicate information. So written language is very necessary for a variety of pursuits and for distribution of ideas. And whether you work digitally or in print, you're going to be dealing with letter forms and typography and written communication. With that said, it's important to understand that our roles as graphic designers is to make it easy for people to understand the information that's being communicated. We do that through appropriate type choices, we do that through layout, we do that through photography and illustration. About 90% of all graphic design projects deal with typography and lettering of some sort. And you may or may not know this already, but type design, typography, is a particular specialty within the graphic design field. It's also important to note that not all typefaces are equal. Typography, letter forms have personality, they have visual weight, and one of the things you want to keep in mind is to treat them not just as pieces of communication, but as shape and form. They have color, they have density, they have proportion, they have positive and negative space. So as you start working with headlines and subheads and body copy, you're dealing with the visual form of the letters and the words, and the visual form of the particular typefaces that you're using, and not just the words themselves. You have to relate the typography to the entire design. You have to select the right typefaces to communicate what needs to be communicated in the right way so that the right audience understands. In this case, you can't just use Arial where Helvetica might be more appropriate. So I wanted to delve into the anatomy of type just to introduce you to letter forms and their various parts so that you can understand them and start working with them as designers. Start recognizing what those various parts do. So we'll start out with the idea of a stroke. On letter forms that have diagonals, the stroke is the primary diagonal. A leg is attached at the top and extends downward. An arm is just the opposite. It's attached at the bottom and extends upward, usually in a diagonal direction, but not always. A shoulder is a part of a curved stroke that moves sideways and then down toward the right. And an ear is an extension, usually on the lowercase g, that rises above the main body of the letter. A tail is a curved leg. So not all typefaces have curvatures on the leg of the R. So in this case, this is a tail, not a leg. The spine is the main joint between the top and the bottom in an S. A bar is a crosspiece or a horizontal stroke. X height is the height of the lowercase x. And take note here that the letter forms that are curved will extend above the x height and extend below the baseline. And that is a proportional styling. If the curvatures are just touching the baseline, those letter forms will appear too small compared to the others. The cap height is the measurement of the uppercase letters from a flat base to the flat top. Here you can see that the S and the Q both extend above the cap height. So when you're measuring X height or cap height, you have to use flat bottom letters. An ascender is any direct straight vertical stroke that extends above the X height. And then of course a descender goes the other direction. The baseline is the understood or implied line on which the flat bottom letters align. And we can draw a straight line from this point on the F to that point on the K, and that's the baseline. There are serif typefaces and sans serif typefaces. In serif typefaces, there are extensions added at the end of certain strokes. A terminal is the end of any sans serif letter form. A bold is a curved stroke that creates a negative shape. A bold will fully enclose a negative shape. This is not a bold, this is. And inside the bold is the counter. The stem is any primary vertical stroke. Some lowercase g's have loops. This does not have a loop. This has a loop. And it has a counter and another counter. And it has an ear. So before the printing press, books were produced by hand, and it was Before the printing press in the 1400s, books were produced by hand, and it was a long, arduous process. Writing out an entire book was labor-intensive. It was done by scribes in scriptoriums, and it could take 2 or 3 years sometimes to write out a book. Take a look at this handwritten manuscript and note the grid lines that have been drawn in and then the lettering done within those lines. So even with manuscripts, the entire page was designed and considered carefully before the lettering was ever written in. When Gutenberg came up with the printing press and movable type, and remember that the Chinese had movable type a lot earlier, the typography of the first printed books, also known as incunabula, mirrored or mimicked the traditional handwritten manuscript style, and today we would call this black letter style. Printing allowed for mass production of books, and the first mass-produced book was the Gutenberg Bible in 1454. Gutenberg's process remained unchanged for centuries. In fact, it's still used today in letterpress printing. A punch made of steel that has a reverse image of a letter form is pressed into a soft metal, which is used to cast the actual piece of type. The type then is put into a matrix along with other types and leading, and it's locked together, and that's what goes on the printing press and is inked. Within just a few decades of Gutenberg's invention, typesetting spread across Europe, and it spread quickly. Within about 50 years, there were over 1,000 printers set up across Europe. And typical print runs for books were anywhere from 200 books to 1,000 books. So not only did the technology spread quickly, information and ideas spread quickly. And basically that changed everything. Typography design remained within the purview of printers in the printing trade for a long time. And there was a strong movement toward legibility and clarity. And rather than pulling from the manuscript era, typographers began to pull from the Roman and the Greek era with their type designs. Typography was more legible, and typefaces were actually designed for clarity, readability, legibility, and beauty. In addition to the concern for legibility, there is the aesthetic quality of type and also the personality. So a variety of typefaces were developed, anywhere from regular or light to bold and heavy, and italic and oblique. And all of these give the graphic designer the ability to create order and hierarchy in a printed or on a digital page on a website. So when you have a variety of typefaces that are all related, you have a typeface family, and a typeface family is known as a font. And a font has not only the letter form characters, but it has the punctuation and the glyphs and the alternate characters and all the things that are needed to set a page of beautiful type. Typography is also used decoratively or as graphic shape in and of itself, as we see here. So typography is not relegated to columns of text. Typography is shape and form and color and can be used in a variety of ways. And so experimental and innovative typography is one thing that you can use as a graphic designer to communicate ideas and concepts and just make it look good. It's from those days way back when that we have the measurement system that uses points and picas. Point and pica are the two units of measurement that are used by printers and designers. So type size is measured in points and line length is measured in picas and also points. We use pica to describe the overall height and width of a text block as well. There are 12 points to a pica and 6 picas to an inch, and there's 72 points to an inch. The vertical distance between lines of text is also measured in points. Typesetting is the process of laying out type on a page. And basically you're working with typography then both as a design and a communication element. Before the digital age, there were different people who did different aspects of the layout process. There was the graphic designer who came up with the overall design, the production artist who dealt with the type fitting, and then the type house which dealt with the type setting. And then the typesetter would send type galleys back to the production artist who would then slice and dice and cut and paste into a physical mechanical layout. In the digital age of design, you as a graphic designer are going to be responsible for not only the design of the page, but the type setting and the type fitting. And then you prepare a mechanical in the form of a PDF with everything embedded, and you send that off to the printer who will do the pre-press on it and print the piece. Or if you're working web design, there is no print production, of course, but you're still responsible for how the typography appears on the web pages. So when you are typesetting on a page, a website, or digitally, legibility, readability are the most important things, as well as conveying the information in a manner that makes sense. So there has to be a lot of logic blended in with your creative bent. When you're using type, think first about what's being communicated and how well it's being communicated. Make it easy to read. You need consistent spacing between letters and words. You need consistent leading between lines of type. So here, this is an email blast. We've got a headline and we have body type. And there is a lot of line space between the body type, making it easy to read. Screen reading is more difficult than reading on paper. You have to be much more careful about the density of your text blocks, the leading, the line spacing, the word spacing, the size of the type, the proportionality of the type between its X height and its cap height, and the overall personality of the type. This is actually a very clean layout. The type's easy to read. And it uses a serif headline and sans serif body. The pairing of typefaces with each other is also an important consideration that you'll have to deal with as a designer. When you are using type, you have to be concerned with what is understood first, because what's understood first leads to the next piece of information. And that needs to be clearly understood so the reader can continue to partake of the information that's being communicated. So visual hierarchy, which is the order of information, is very important. Hierarchy means that you have your first thing seen first. The most important thing that needs to be read and understood first is primary, then the secondary. All of that will create a visual pull through your page. There is this universal design principle that we call the Gutenberg principle, where in Western languages, you enter a page from the top left and you zigzag through the page and then exit the bottom right. That's an automatic understanding because that's how we're used to reading. So your page layout can go with that flow, or by hierarchy, by visual hierarchy, you can reframe the information and position it so that there is an obvious start, an obvious entry point, and then there's various points that the viewer's eye lands on within the design that are secondary and tertiary. As we look at this, and this came from the city of Los Angeles, so it's a government thing. The main headline here is how to bid for city contracts, and it's not centered within the design. It is surrounded by a lot of competing information and visual stuff. This seems to be a big deal. You get to eat, you get to park for free, and you get to get into the event for free. There's a lot of stuff visually that's competing with all of this. This is not a good layout. It's not a good use of typography. It is loud. It is noisy. It's not noisy in a good, exciting way. It's more noisy in a cluttered way, and it doesn't really lead the viewer's eye to the right places for the right things. And typography plays a huge role in this design, even though it seems to be mostly image, because the images help clutter, so the typography has to be the thing to carry the day. Compare that with something else that landed into my inbox. Hierarchy is used here very well. So, first of all, we have the Gutenberg principle in effect. We enter from the upper left. We know who this is coming from. We have an image. We have headline. We have body copy. We have a subhead, and that's set in italics or oblique to stand out a little bit and capture our attention. Then we have more body copy and explanation, some nice bullet points. And then over here we have the call to action box with the one-time offer. And then we have a little bit about the person who is sending this out. So if you see this, there is a strong upper left to lower right diagonal pull through the page. Makes sense. It's 2 columns. It's sorted and organized fairly well. There are some flaws to it in terms of design, structure, and composition, but they're very minor. It's easy to read, and compared to the previous one, this is a dream. Makes good use of the white space. And here's another one. And again, it's using a diagonal. It's got a entry point, and it has various signposts that draw the reader's eye through the page. When you use typography in a logo, you don't want to use the letter forms exactly as they come, because then it's not really unique enough. There's myriad companies out there, myriad businesses and organizations that use Helvetica in their logos, and it's all kind of the same. A logo needs to be a unique representative of what it's representing. Remember that signifier signified thing. So with a logo, you want to be able to modify the characters to fit the need or fit the design, and that modification can be subtle or extreme. And one of the ways you modify the characters is that you convert the type to outline when you're working in Illustrator, and then you can grab the vector handles and just kind of manipulate the heck out of it. So the FedEx logo is a subtle manipulation of the letter forms. Forms are manipulated so that we get this arrow in the negative space. The negative shape here is the arrow. So we talk about fonts, and we buy fonts, or we buy the licenses to fonts. We sign up for Adobe Creative Cloud, and we get Typekit along with that as part of our subscription. A font and typeface are often used interchangeably, but they're not quite exactly the same. A font is a family. It's like hue is a family of color. Font is a family of typefaces. So in this case, we're looking at exemplars of Benguiat, and we have Benguiat Book, and we have Benguiat Medium, which is a little heavier, and then we have Benguiat Bold and Book Italic, Medium Italic, and Bold Italic. Book is a different typeface than Medium, and Medium's a different typeface than Medium Italic. So here we have 6 typefaces. All of them together make up ITC Benguiat. All 6 of them together as a font. And font, again, also includes all the special characters and all the punctuation. So this is a screenshot of the Monotype website. But Monotype is a type foundry, and when you purchase a font license, you purchase the right to use the font. And with any license, there are things you can do with the fonts and things that you can't do with the fonts. In most cases, you can't take that font and sell it to somebody else and make money off of it, nor should you give the font away like to a client, nor should you take a font from your employer, download it from your employer's computer and put it on your own laptop and walk away with it. Be cautious how you handle fonts and typefaces in terms of how you acquire them. There's a lot of free fonts out there, and there's a lot of operating system fonts that come with your Mac or your PC. Everything else is licensed. And the thing is that typeface designers are designers, graphic designers, just like you and me. And they need to make a living just like you and I do. So don't steal from your fellow pros. You can get free fonts. And free fonts are kind of really cool because there's a lot of creativity. The thing about free fonts is that they may not work at all point sizes. They may not letter space or line space really comfortably. Often they do not have the alternates nor the punctuation. Use free fonts. That's what they're there for. But be cautious because they don't act the same as a font that you would license or something that comes in Adobe Typekit with Creative Cloud subscription. Typefaces and type was created originally for print. Since reading on the screen is different, web fonts were created specifically to be read on screen. Desktop fonts are created specifically to be read comfortably in print. When you purchase licenses to fonts, you can purchase just for web, you can purchase for print, or you can purchase for both. With Adobe Type Library and Google Fonts, usually you're going to get, well, specifically Adobe Type Library, you're going to be able to use both web and screen fonts right there within that subscription service. Google Fonts is mostly web fonts created for legibility on screen. And of course, you can go to any font foundry and purchase fonts that you would actually own the license to directly and not through a subscription service like Adobe. Google Fonts, by the way, are open source and available for use without having to license them. Lettering is not typography. Lettering is much more related to calligraphy. Lettering may appear similar to type, but it's not a font. It's not a typeface. So lettering is drawn letter forms. Drawn letter forms allow for a lot of creative possibility and are a good crossover between typography and illustration. And you can use hand lettering within illustration as well. This is not typesetting that we're looking at. This is illustration using letter forms. Calligraphy is writing. It's stylized writing, it's elegant, it's beautiful, it can be kind of wanky and crazy, but it is stylized writing using a brush or a pen. This baseball piece is all drawn by hand. It's inventive lettering, it's illustration, it's not typography. This is typography. So here we see a really good use of hierarchy and line spacing, letter spacing. Wall Street Journal does a really good job with their typography. It's very elegant. So this is from the printed version of the Wall Street Journal. And hierarchically, we have the display type. All the headlines are set in display type. Then there's a subhead. There's use of italics. There's use of Roman style type. We've got justified columns. This is actually the entry point for the page design. And then we're going to read Wall Street Journal, Nelson Mandela, but we're still going to kind of come through the page this direction once we enter it here. We'll go up to the top and read this way. Almost all the type on this page is serif. There's a few up here in the masthead that are sans serif. Book cover design is a good field if you love typography and you like doing innovative and experimental things with it. So this is a compelling cover and it's just type. It's just very simply laid out. It's a good use of space. The whole design is the design, so the typography relates to the overall piece really well, the overall design space really well. And the handling of the type speaks to the content or the story that's between the covers. Title design is another place where typography is very important. In fact, a lot of title design is typography alone. Another way to use typography is, again, just as shape. Positive shape, negative shape, overall form. So here we see an L with an S in it. And this is a poster, which means it's an advertisement. So there are a variety of ways that as a graphic designer you'll be using type and lettering. So start thinking about the possibilities. Start curating typography, start curating letter forms and lettering design, and see what you can make of those things as you create your work. Want to introduce you to the concept of the design brief. It's a set of specifications, goals, and purposes for any particular design or series of designs. It's a guide. It is a summary. The design brief is used to lay out the goals for both the designer and the client, or the creative team and the client. So this is one of my design briefs. And so it can be just simply laid out on letterhead like this. But what you include in the design brief is information about the client. So the information about the client is going to be some background, the reason for the project at this point, what they're trying to accomplish with the project, what's gotten them to this point to set up the need for the design project. So you shouldn't start a design project with a client without knowing about the client. The design brief will include the project title, and so here's the client, and then the project title is here, and then here's the description. This also contains the objectives, and I lay it out in a phase because I think that's helpful to clients to understand exactly what's involved in the process. And the phases also include their involvement in the process. It's not just what I do, it's my interaction with them and what they can expect. Again, background information is who the client is and what they're all about, who their audience is, how long have they been in business, what's their competition, what's their SWOT, opportunities and threats within the marketplace, what are their strengths and their weaknesses internally. And then the deliverables are outlined. And you want to be as specific as you can be. Deliverable is, say, it's a logo. And then another deliverable would be a business card with the logo on it and other information. And another deliverable might be a social media banner or a website. So those are each different deliverables. And then requirements are those things, the absolute must-haves that the client needs. It needs to be these colors, or it needs to incorporate this. And then you take those deliverables and the requirements, what does the design need to do for the client? And you put that into a design strategy. Maybe the strategy is it's an older company that wants to reach a millennial audience or a younger audience. What is the designer going to do in the design or address in the design solution that is going to enable the client to reach the market? Then there's always a timeline or schedule, because time needs to be budgeted as well, and that should be a realistic expectation on both parts. The designer needs to build in some margin, and the client needs to understand the schedule also includes the review and approval process. How much are you getting paid? What are the expenses? Does this involve website hosting? Does this involve purchasing of stock image licenses or font licenses? What are your creative fees? Are you subcontracting out anything? What are those fees going to be? So the budget should be as inclusive as possible. So that's pretty much everything that goes into a design brief. And they're important for you at this stage because every project that you do as a designer does have a purpose. It does have an audience, in other words, people on the receiving end. Your clients will be on the sending end, so you're creating something for your clients to build their brand, to make more money, whatever it is. Remember that design solves business, not visual problems. It uses visual stuff to solve business problems. You are a service provider, problem solver, and the more you know about your client's situation, the better you are able to design for that and help your client become successful in the things that they want to do.